On this episode, the topic is inspiring STEM learning in the next generation. And so I'm going to introduce myself, and then we have a couple of other guests here, and we'll get started. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So my name's Hannah Gilbert. I am the STEM program manager, STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm also the camp director at one of our camp locations, Camp Lacamaga. So I do that during the summer, which is super fun. And my experience is I've worked in science and outdoor education for about 9 years now, and I'm really passionate about it. So I'm super excited to be having this conversation today and to kind of bring everyone together around this topic. Just so you know, you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. So if you want to communicate with us, the best way to do that is in the chat. So you can use that chat box, and hopefully we'll have some time for additional questions at the end. But feel free to kind of engage with the topic and talk about stuff in the chat as well. And let us know if you have any questions or concerns. Awesome. So before I introduce our guest speaker for this episode, I'd like to turn it over to Girl Scouts River Valley's CEO, Tish Bolger, for a few words. So let me just get this here and we'll do this. There we go.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. I'm so excited to have Hannah and Jayshree here today to talk about STEM. And, you know, we just think about imagining girls of all colors and physical abilities, economic status, taking on some of the biggest challenges and problems that our planet face and helping solve them, or having a career that's engaging and it's well paid. Imagine her teaming up with others to invent the future. And that future can be a reality thanks to science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. We know and research shows that girls are really interested in STEM and they excel at it. Yet we also know that for a lot of different reasons, girls often don't pursue STEM, and it starts as early as elementary school. And unfortunately, the proof is really in the numbers. And when girls graduate from school, the numbers are even more telling. But Girl Scouts is committed to and will change that. Girl Scouts lets girls see that STEM can help her make the world a better place, and she's engaged in that. Really, to put it simply, there just aren't enough women in STEM, despite the fact that STEM careers are the fastest growing sector in the US economy and often the highest paying opportunities. So women hold less than 25% of STEM jobs in the US, and only 1 in 3 chemists are women. Less than 8% of mechanical engineers are women, and 1 out of 3 environmental engineers are women. To be competitive in the global market over the next decade, the United States is going to need an astounding 1 million more STEM professionals than we're currently on track to produce. Where will they come from? Well, I know one place. They're going to come from Girl Scouts. We're committed to filling the STEM workforce pipeline. Let me give you an example of one of our initiatives under our STEM umbrella. It's our Power Girls program, and it's at Camp Lacamaga, where Hannah's the camp director. It's focused on building a pipeline of young women entering construction and engineering fields. One participant in our week-long Power Girls camp spoke last year at Women in Construction Week, and she shared that she is now the only girl in her high school's industrial engineering class. She said, "It doesn't matter that I'm the only girl, because I know that I'm doing what I'm doing and I want to be there," because Girl Scouts gave her that confidence. She embraced it. Another participant shared, "Girls know that if we take a shop class, it's going to be all boys. That's why I love Power Girls. And when I didn't know how to do something or needed help, I wasn't afraid to raise my hand and ask for it because it was other girls around me." Girl Scouts provides a safe place for girls who are interested in STEM. And I can't talk about our STEM program without a shout out to 3M for their leadership support in our Girl Scouts trades program. 3M has been a partner of ours in STEM programming since Girl Scouts STEM program inception. And also a big thank you to the STEM community in Minnesota and Wisconsin for making Girl Scout STEM programs thrive even during this pandemic. It's important to teach girls that STEM isn't just one person, it's people, it's organizations and companies across our state and across the nation. At the end of the day, we want to change the workforce pipeline for Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we're going to continue to work hard together with all of our partners so that girls become STEM professionals, especially focusing on careers where women and women of color are so underrepresented. So thank you all so much for being here today. I know you're going to be inspired by today's conversation with Jayshree and Hannah. Thanks.
Thanks, Tish. That was a great introduction to what we're going to talk about today. And I'm really excited to get started. So I'm going to introduce our guest. I'm really honored to introduce Jayshree Seth. Jayshree Seth is a corporate scientist at 3M, and she's also 3M's first ever chief science advocate. Coolest job title ever. She has a master's and PhD in chemical engineering, and she was awarded Society of Women Engineers' highest achievement honor in 2020 for her contributions to the field. In 2020, she was also a Woman of Distinction honoree at Girl Scouts River Valleys. She has 71 patents, and she's also the author of a new book, The Heart of Science: Engineering Footprints, Fingerprints, and Imprints. With all the sale proceeds going to a scholarship for underrepresented minority women in STEM. So Jayshree, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's going to be great. And I think to kick it off, let me remove my screen here so we can be a little bit larger. I want to know, so we kind of view you as a change maker, right? You got into engineering when women were much less common in the field. Can you share a little bit about your journey of discovering engineering and getting into it?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I grew up on the campus of a engineering college. My dad was a university professor. So everybody around me was a STEM professional. It's interesting though, I didn't think of myself as the science and engineering type because I just wanted to make the world a better place. I wanted to help people. I wanted to improve lives. And I just didn't see the connection because STEM wasn't talked about that way. And I just went there because my parents strongly encouraged us. And back in the day and growing up where I did, you did what your parents told you to do. So I became an engineer because of that. But they knew something I didn't. They knew that I would be successful in this career. I just didn't know that. So that's something I like to tell people. It is a journey. And so it's not some predetermined, place you're going with a map in your hand. It's more of a journey, and then you learn things about yourself. I didn't realize that although I had a very communal mindset, STEM would be just the right place to do exactly what I wanted to do. So that's the message I take in my cool job now, which is the chief science advocate. I like to tell people, don't be deterred by what you think is science and what scientists do, and who enters or who persists or who excels, because I'm a perfect example. I didn't think I was a science and engineering type. I went there because my parents told me to. I struggled a bit through graduate school. I didn't have one particular expertise, but I did fine. It worked out. So that's kind of my journey in a nutshell.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned making the world a better place, because that's something we talk a lot about in Girl Scouts. And when we talk about STEM in Girl Scouts, and it really resonates with girls too. We've done research. The Girl Scout Research Institute has done research and identified that the number one thing that girls are looking at when they choose a career is, can they improve the world? Can they make the world a better place? And I love to talk about how STEM is one of those fields where you really can make an impact, even if you don't think about it at first. So I love that you made that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So kind of today, the topic is really about how do we encourage girls and young women when they're facing barriers that are specific to their gender in STEM fields. Can you speak a little bit about what is your encouragement to girls and young women when they're facing those barriers?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to listen. We can't ignore. And then validate and sort of reaffirm their interest in the field, and that some of these things that may be happening should not deter them from continuing, because in many ways you're paving the way. Tish just gave examples of people who have been the only person there, and it may seem unfair at some level, but some people have to pave the way, and then after that this won't be a concern. So somebody's got to do it. So I feel like we have to listen, we have to validate that what they're seeing is real, because in many STEM fields you are in a very male-centric environment, which has been laid out in a very male-centric way, but it doesn't mean that you can't bring that up and sort of make everybody aware of it, and everybody wants to move forward on those things. And then also reaffirm the interest that you are right in being interested in this, and you should push on. That is important. You know, the way I like to say it, Hannah, is it's time for steam cleaning when these things happen. S is for shattering of stereotypes. T is for telling the wholesome story. E is about environment and exposure. A is for allies and advocates. So you have to have those allies and advocates who make it easier for you. And then metrics and measures, where you say, we need such and thus numbers to make sure we have diversity, otherwise we won't succeed. So if we do all of these things and steam clean, then it's a steam engine that could.
Wow, I love that that metaphor, or that like acronym. It's a great kind of model to think about how we can open up these spaces and make them. And I really like what you said about sort of reaffirming the problem. I think that one of the things we've noticed, that I noticed in working with girls, is that they know that there's a gender gap in STEM, and they know that, you know, like Tish said, they know that maybe if they join that shop class, or if they do that advanced science class, they might be outnumbered by boys or men in their classes. So I like what you said about reaffirming the problem. Do you have examples of kind of what that looks like when you're doing that process?
It is a little bit of a difficult process, because once people make up their mind about something, it's kind of hard to change that. So a couple of things that I think about is, how do we continually sort of keep this up? And it's not just, oh my God, there's a problem, now we got to intervene, right? So that, I think, gets addressed by having some sort of a peer connection, some sort of a peer group, mentors, others who have gone through issues, reading about people. You don't always have to meet people. Sometimes just reading about people and their struggles and how they overcame can be very inspiring. And so it's just finding that connection and finding your strength to somehow figure out how to keep pushing along. And then not to keep it to yourself. Have you brought it up to anybody around you? And how have they responded? And 9 times out of 10, you'll find out people are not doing certain things because of malicious intent. It's just they don't realize. So finding your voice to speak up, not just for yourself, but also think about it in terms of making the world a better place for other girls and women who are to follow, so that plug it into your communal mindset, and then you can sort of help this issue.
I love that. Yeah. And that's a great connection too. We're making the world a better place for those who come after us. And I think that the role models that we work to connect girls with, you, other women, they speak about that a lot, about how, you know, it was one other person who showed them that this was possible. There's a great story that I share from one of our program partners. She works in plumbing and kind of engineering in that way. And she was actually working as a temp at the place she was working at for a long time. And then one day, a woman plumber came in, and she just had this light bulb, right? So seeing that you're making an impact for young women and girls the same way you are, and all the other women in STEM who kind of come out and talk about their experiences.
Yeah. And and I think by the, you know, same token, I think everybody has struggles, and they will be different in flavor, different in variety, and all of that. And so just finding people who say how that they have struggled and how they address that kinship, I think that always helps. to assume that nobody has any struggles. And I even throw in males in this. Everybody has some struggles. So to assume that because it looks like they don't, that they don't, So I think understanding and accepting and normalizing that we are all struggling through whatever it is we're trying to do will help all of us. So I also say, a level of transparency and letting people know, yes, I did it. Yes, I'm here now. But you know what? It was hard. It wasn't very easy. So I think that's important.
That's great. So one of the things we want to talk about is, and Tish mentioned this, kind of how do we start young? How do we get girls and young women interested early on so they can discover these opportunities? So first of all, how do we sort of build spaces that feel welcoming to girls and young women as they're exploring these opportunities? What do you think a space looks like that's welcoming to a girl or young woman?
That's an interesting question. So I'm quickly thinking back to my kids, right? My son and my daughter. So I've had that experience. And I'll tell you this, one thing I noticed very clearly, my son was very content focused. So it is the what that drove him. My daughter was very context focused. So it was the why that drew her in. So if we are making spaces that are for girls, they better have more contextual information in it rather than just content. So my son was happy with the 2 robots or whatever it is, but for my daughter, it's more of the context. How is this going to help someone? How is this? So knowing what we know about, psychology, social sciences, evolutionary constructs, social conditioning, I think having those inclusive environment that don't seem threatening, don't seem overly competitive, have some sort of a community-oriented mindset, are inspirational and collaborative. I think those spaces would perhaps be more suited for girls rather than force-fitting something that was made for boys and that's like, okay, now it's for girls and without even addressing those, I think could be an issue. And it might turn some people off because they're not finding the context that they're looking for. If I'm looking at a robot and also I'm looking at an old person getting, medicine delivered by this robot, I get the context and I feel like, oh, I want to help old people get this, or have somebody with them who's a buddy, who's a robot. I get how that would work and things like that. So a little bit more of the storytelling as opposed to just the facts, evidence, data. I think that will help young people all around, because I believe that even though we may find that some boys are very focused on the content, it's very important to describe the context. Otherwise, we have things go haywire. And we have this situation happening in many areas, like in artificial intelligence and stuff, where people were focusing on just the content and what is possible and not realizing that now you are feeding in the same bias into your system. So I was very happy to see that my son, who's doing computer science, has to go through much ethics and all those training so that they can also develop that contextual piece of what's going on. So long answer, sorry, but I really think it's very important, not just for girls, but for all young folks now to be sort of get in tune with this idea of understanding the context of things, not just what is possible, but what could possibly go wrong if you don't think about the human context.
I love that, because I think too, engineering, especially in lots of STEM fields, serve people. Like their purpose is to serve people, is to solve problems for people.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And so that is a really important kind of thread to make sure that people know whether they're really interested in the nitty-gritty detail of how stuff works, or if really what drives them is helping people and how that can be connected. I love that. And we strive to do that at Girl Scouts, I think, by connecting, having the projects that they work on feel like they could be part of the real world. So either they're based on a real world problem, or they're, they feel connected to that. And I think that I do see that making a difference. I think another piece that you could probably speak to as an engineer as well is the teamwork piece. I know that I have a lot of Girl Scouts who come in kind of with this perception that science and engineering is done by like the singular genius, you know, like the Einstein type, right? And that's kind of the vision that they have in their head. So what we try to do is break that down and build in teamwork. Do you see that as an important component as well for those spaces?
It's so important. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that I do of any consequence that I do as an individual. And everything we do, whether it's a simple idea to a very complex thing, we have so many people who are involved. And it's so great because no one person knows everything. And when you have all these different backgrounds and all these different functional expertise and all these different ideas, it just makes for a better team and a better solution. So it is definitely a collaborative career. You know, if you want to work with people, you like working with people, it's great because, you know, truth be told, I worked on growing diamond-like carbon films out of laser and plasma, and my first job was in diapers, and I'd never seen a diaper before. Right, so from diamonds to diapers, that's what I used to joke. How am I ever going to know what to do? And I didn't have kids at that time, and I was just like, what? I'm working on what? You know, it was interesting to look at this stuff and go, okay, I get it. It's important. You know, this is a good product to have. But then you just go about in that collaborative process, learning about what it is, what kind of materials I use, what are the problems to solve, what are the parents facing as they diaper the baby. And all of this information I can't gather on my own. So you have all these different functions, and it's not just engineering functions, it's the marketing function, it's the sales functions, it's, you know, so everybody combines to come up with the right thing. So having a collaborative space and having a collaborative thought process trains people for what is to come. And I think people get confused easily because of media. In media, you show typically either a loner or a geek or a nerd or a maverick or a genius or evil, you know, and none of these things are what, you know, my daughter wanted to be, right? So it's very important to portray it in a proper manner.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's that media stereotype. Whenever I do a programming event, there's the girls agree with the stereotype that it's done alone in a basement. And that's just so different from the reality of the experience. So I love breaking those stereotypes up.
Mm-hmm.
We got a kind of a question too from a pre-submitted question from someone who that kind of builds on this, and it asks about out of school opportunities. How can those impact girls when you see there's certain opportunities in school and then there's opportunities out of school? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Any opportunity is a great opportunity to be involved. If it opens up your mind, exposes you to different things, gives you the ability to learn something, I think they're all great. I really don't draw boundaries between work, home, school. All of that to me is as long as you have that learning mindset and you want to do good stuff and you're getting the exposure to something new and it seems to interest you, I think that would be great. I used to even tell my kids, even if it doesn't interest you, I'd like to know why. And I said, it's not because I want to know why, you should know why. What are the aspects about that you didn't like? Or it's okay, what is it that you didn't like? And so knowing that will also help us in life. So I've really found that all kinds of, you know, opportunities are good. And they tell you something, they teach you something.
I love building in that opportunity for reflection. So even if you didn't like something, we often ask the girls in our programs, you know, what was the hardest part too? Give an opportunity to talk about that, vent about it a little bit maybe,
Yep.
And acknowledge that there's, you know, challenge built into these pieces. I think that reflection is really important.
Yeah, and I think when you are very young, you start associating what I like with what I'm good at, right? But that's a very fast way of sort of putting yourself in a box, because when you're that young, you really don't know what's out there, right? And suddenly you show up at, let's say, piano, and you go, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd like it. Or you show up at the Science Bowl and you think you're not going to like it, but then you're in this team and you're all, you know, learning all of this stuff, and you go to the competition together and it's like, wow, I like it, you know? So even though you may not be good, you get better, all those things are tied up. So I really, really think that if possible, as much exposure as possible to any and all activities is a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of connects to another topic we wanted to talk about, which was sort of failure and persistence, kind of how that's built into the experience of going into these fields and the fields themselves, right? Failure is built into the process of engineering. So what would be sort of your advice for how we encourage girls to be persistent through the process, even if they experience a failure?
Yeah, and that's a tough one for girls especially, because you're putting your expectations very high. You want to excel, you want to do well, and the minute you see you're not, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm not good at this, and the whole failure aspect. And I know that from my own experience, right? But one thing is, very early on, somehow I redefined failure in my mind. If we were learning something, then it wasn't a failure. You learned something. So it's the stories we tell ourselves sometimes, and it's good to tell yourself, it's not a failure. How is it a failure if I learned something? And so that's a good way to persist through. How would I do it differently or better is fine, but it wasn't a failure because I learned something. So redefining that constantly for yourself. So let's say you're around those young folks, then we should be the ones asking them, so what did you learn? Well, I learned this. Well, then why is it a failure? So once they hear that from the people around them, I think it also helps. Otherwise, it's very easy to get, the other thing is everybody runs through some things that didn't turn out the way they wanted. To think that other people who seem successful or who are successful didn't have any of those in their career is just not true. And so again, more of that communication about normalizing that sometimes things, and oftentimes things don't work out as you plan, but isn't necessarily a failure. So I always asked my kids, did you try to do your best? And don't answer me, answer yourself. Right? Because that gets very tough when you have to answer for yourself, because you can tell mommy, yeah, I did. But then you kind of, I didn't. But, so that process. And then if you learn something, how is that a failure? You never know when it's going to come in handy,
Yeah, I think that that normalizing piece, that's something that I try to do in our programs. For a lot of our engineering programs, I'm presenting a challenge, and it's difficult on purpose. And so one of the things I'll say at the beginning is, you will fail. You will try to do this and you will not succeed the first time, maybe not the second time, maybe not even the third time. And that's built into it. And sometimes we try to also celebrate failure. So, if you try to see if your machine worked and it didn't, you can kind of yell out and tell everyone that that's what happened, and we'll all cheer for you, because really that's built into the process. It has to be a part of it. So it can't feel bad. It has to feel like expected.
Yeah. I think the normalizing piece is very important. How many drugs had to be developed before this came? How many molecules you have to go through to find the right protein for this? How many experiments you have to do before you come up with this? I mean, it's like a constant process of iteration. It's not this one eureka moment. Absolutely not. So it's built in, and that mindset is actually a great mindset just to live life, whether you go in science or not, right? That it's not failure, you're just iterating.
For sure, yeah. So kind of relatedly, what are related to sort of the situation we're in now and the challenges we're facing now, and encouraging girls to continue their interest in this while they're at home. Do you have any resources or thoughts on how to encourage girls to keep exploring while we're socially distancing and staying home?
Yeah, now that becomes a little difficult because of the social nature of everything. Mostly girls want to do more social and things like that. I'm generalizing, but I think there is a lot to be said about asking, what is it that you want to solve? What are the problems that you are finding around you? What is it that would be an easy thing that would make your life easier? So constantly asking them to think and do thought experiments. I would ask all the time, what would make, well, if the water was hot the minute I turned it on, those kinds of things. Your kids will come up with the darndest things, right? Well, I don't like that I have to run it a little bit before I'm like, okay, how do you think, that can happen? And, so really just how can you make things better? How would it be better? And that is really a driving force to do thought experiments. Second is, who do you want to know more about? What do you want to know more about? Let's look at that. Let's research it. And you tell me what you found out, because I don't know. I want to learn along with you, And then simple things like kitchen and those kinds of things. There's amazing experiments that people can do in the kitchen. It's just phenomenal. Just making cookies and then trying to do it with different things. And so we just have to figure out how to build in those excitement and those things that people can do a little bit individually. But there's also so many easy ways to connect with others and do science-based programs and detective. I've seen all of those things. It's just great. It's like clues and then you can go ahead and do them, or just read about people. You want to know about women scientists. You want to know about what people did, So lots of, I think people pick up from what the parents are reflecting sometimes. So I think it's important to keep that spirit going, that, we're all in this together and we're all going to figure out how to do this. Watching science documentaries. There's some phenomenal documentaries just about the natural world around us. And I watch them over and over again as I'm exercising. I love watching. And who doesn't like to see things about animals and in nature and stuff like that? So lots of opportunity to get them engaged and then write about it. Because the one thing I'd like to really emphasize is that communication skills are extremely important. Doesn't matter who you are, what you do, where you go, what you study. So even if you are in STEM and you saw something, now what did you take away from it? What does that make you want to feel like? How would you talk about that? Write it down, make a little presentation and do those things, and then present it to 4 of your friends, and each one presents about something. And so now you made it a social thing, but also communication. So lots of things that can be tried. I understand it's not ideal at this point, certainly not, but we have to just muscle through it.
Yeah, I love that. There's definitely lots of resources out there. I know Girl Scouts is offering STEM programming throughout this time virtually, and that's been really fun. And I was struck by your question about how to make things better. One of the recommendations that I often give to parents who have girls who are a little bit on the older side is the piece of technology that they love the most. Maybe it's a video game system, maybe it's their phone, they've got applications that they really like. Try to transform them from a user to an engineer by just thinking about, what would you change about this?
Absolutely.
And that's it. Yeah. So like, what would make this even better for you or for your friend? And so that little mindset is just a little shift that they can start thinking about. I don't have to just be a user that accepts what is given, right? I could also create something.
Absolutely. And the sooner and earlier and younger we start at that, the better it is, because then they know that they can be thinking through this.
So we'll kind of wrap up our kind of questions together, our conversation together here, and then see if we have any additional questions from the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in now. So I wanted to know, what inspires you about the future of STEM? What are you inspired going forward?
Honestly, I'm inspired by the many girls and underrepresented minorities and young folks, who have pro-social goals and community-oriented mindset, who are going to come and bring the much needed change that we need. That's what I think is going to be the most inspiring. I was just, we had last year. It's kind of funny to say last year because it seems like the 13th month of the same year.
Yeah.
In 2020, we had our Discovery 3M Young Scientist Challenge, and phenomenal to see these middle schoolers, doing such great things. And you just go, wow. And that's the future. So I'm just very hopeful and looking forward to see what these young minds do. And that's what inspires me.
All right, so that's great. I'm inspired by that too. Every time I work with the Girl Scouts that we work with, and see their excitement around this and their passion and some of the solutions they come up with for the challenges that I give them. It's just really exciting to see their thought process and how engaged they are. So I'm also very inspired by that.
Yep.
So we've got some questions. First of all, definitely tell us more about your book that was just released. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's about?
Yes, and I keep it close to me all the time. Can you see there?
Yeah.
The Heart of Science, Engineering Footprints, Fingerprints, and Imprints. And all the sales proceeds of this will go for scholarship for underrepresented minority women of color in STEM. And what this is basically some of the things that I have learned, as a parent, as a sort of student of science, as a practitioner, and it doesn't talk about any of my projects or technical details, nothing like that. Just my thoughts on what I think makes for a good, career, makes for a good experience, makes for good leadership, and how to sort of integrate science. So what I like to say is the real shtick is STEM, science, humanities, technology, engineering, and math. And so if you love acronyms and style like that, the book is full of that because I love it. So I talk about how to integrate humanities into STEM to make sure women and younger folks and all are interested in it. I talk about the leadership context and how I'm not the boss. I don't have hundreds of people reporting to me, but I try to lead from whichever job I'm in, and the idea of leading from your rung of the ladder, how everybody can be that leader. So I write about that. I write about this society and science and things like that, and a lot of discussion on some of the results of our 3M's Data Science Index, which is a survey we do to try and understand what the world thinks about science. So we do it every year globally, and the results always are fascinating. And so I write about that and what it means for us and what should we do there. And I use a lot of my experiences and my experience with my children, and I talk about that. How do you inculcate curiosity? How do you, capitalize on that sense of wonder that children have and things like that. So I totally hope that people will buy this book, spread the word, because it's all for a good cause. And you may learn a few acronyms that I made up.
I love that. Awesome. We had a question earlier too about your engineering degree. So what is it that you can do because you have an engineering degree that you couldn't do if you didn't have that?
I think a lot of this is about understanding depth of certain things, because at some point, in order to solve a problem, you will need the technical and functional expertise. So that's kind of what the engineering degree teaches you, so that you can do those things faster and you can do them better because you are relying on what has been done for a long time through science and then research around it and the latest and greatest on it. So it trains you in a specific way to solve those problems so that you don't have to muddle your way through it. Now, having said that, I will also say that you will never be only working in that area. However, having done engineering in one particular subject gives you the general idea of how to address a problem, and then it's easier for you to adapt different areas as well. And some are easier than others, but a functional expertise allows you to technically solve certain problems, which is important. Now, I have a PhD, which means I have researched something to death. I mean, you really get into it in detail. But it's not about what you did, it's more about how you did it. Because once I came to 3M, I was not working on diamond-like carbon films, I was working on disposable diapers. But the process was the same as you do in your PhD project, finding out what problem are you solving and why is it important? Figuring out who has done what on this problem, because a PhD means I'm the first person working on this aspect of this problem. So you have to know what's going on in the world around that problem. So a lot of reading and assimilation. Then addressing the best ways to actually solve the problem, convincing a judge and jury to say that's what it is, and you defend your thesis, and the people say, okay, yeah, we agree that this is the best way to go at it, and then executing day in and day out, working the plan to get those results, collecting them, communicating them through papers and conferences. And then once you have become an expert, you graduate with that doctoral thesis. Same thing in my job. We want to figure out how to do this. Well, why are we solving this problem? And who does this help? What have other people done to solve this problem? Should we go about do this and then defend how we are going to do it so we can get the budget to do it, and then execute day in and day out till the product is commercialized? So the PhD gives you the more of the training in the process also. So that's very important.
I love that. That's why we call our engineering badge and our engineering journey series, Think Like an Engineer.
Absolutely.
So it's really about that mindset and building that process in. So I think we have time for one more question. Someone asked, what approach do you take when you're feeling stuck on a project, or a project feels stuck? What kind of approach do you take to that?
Yeah, that happens a lot. So you run into a roadblock, or you run into some, any kind of an issue. So basically for me, it's very simple. 3 things. I take a break from it and try to think about different things. And then suddenly it comes to me, have we tried this? Oh my God, we haven't tried that. So sometimes just walking away for a bit helps. Second is talking to people. So once we have a problem, we will call everybody and anybody at 3M and say, we're doing this. This is what's going on. This is what's happening. What do you think? And that always helps. And third is about reading. I read to try and figure out who might have addressed this exact issue and how did they do it in this different field or a similar field, and how we can go about it. So yeah, it happens all the time. But again, you just figure it out. How do you proceed? And sometimes you figure out there's a better problem to solve and you switch gears as a result of that. Sometimes you try 5 different things and you find something new that excites you and you can pursue that, or you end up solving the problem. And sometimes you find, oh my gosh, there's this other people in this dental group that have already solved this problem. Didn't know about it, so we can solve that. So I think those 3 things to me, and they happen all the time.
All right, so I heard from our moderator, we can ask a couple more questions here. We got a few questions kind of about balancing your career and family pieces, and like sort of advice you might have around that for women or young women who want to do those things. And then on top of that, kind of being at work, in a STEM field, being asked to kind of prove yourself over and over again to be seen as legitimate. How would you sort of address it? So that's kind of 2 questions. One is like that work and family piece. We'll go there first. How do you balance those pieces?
Yeah, I think everybody has a personal solution for that, depending on their family situation, depending on, a lot of different things. For me, very early on, I kind of adopted what I call work-life semblance. So instead of work-life balance, it's work-life semblance, which basically means I look for similarities between work and life, and I don't want to have work and life. And the balance really bothers me, because that means if work is more, then life is not. And if life is more, work is not. And that doesn't work for me. I love what I do. I'd like to have it be seamless. So I say work-life semblance. What that means is if there's a decision to be made at work, I think about how I would have made that decision at home. And it just cuts through the crap and we make the decision, right? Because at work, sometimes you can just talk about it and go around in circles and not make a decision. And by the same token, at home, sometimes there's so many inefficiencies, but if it was work, they wouldn't be tolerated. So there I bring that. So there's pros and cons to that, but it really worked for our family, is to have this work-life semblance. Then I never felt that I was sacrificing one for the other, but I tried to be more efficient in adopting this. So what it also means is I had to be a lot more authentic and a lot more open and a lot more transparent at work, which is hard, right? Because you're just like, okay, let's get to this and let's do this, or this is how I feel. No, I think we're going in circles. So we have to all step up to make sure that it can happen. Because I wouldn't want to waste time on something that I think we could do faster, but we are wasting so much time, right? So those kinds of things. And then there's got to be a support system, sort of. So between your family, figuring out how to make everybody sort of self-sufficient when the need arises and things like that. So the guiding principle to me would be that the work-life semblance piece really helped me. And I have a whole chapter on that in the book. The second question, I think, was more around the workplace. Now, I have to say, very fortunate to be in an environment where I felt very valued. And I think it was also the idea of saying what it is that I can help with and verbalizing it so that people understood what I thought I bring, rather than having to prove myself constantly, right? And to me, it was more like, this is what I can do. This is where I need help. This is what I don't understand, but I'm willing to learn. And that willing to learn piece is really liberating, right? Because you say you know this, you don't know this, but whatever you don't know, you're willing to learn. Then everybody, and 9 times out of 10, everybody is in that situation. Nobody knows everything there is to know. But openly admitting it makes it sound like, oh, okay, so she's willing to learn, which is true. But it doesn't make me feel like I need to prove something. I already told you what I know, what I don't know, and I'm willing to learn.
I love that. That's a great answer. And the semblance piece is also a really helpful framework, I think, for anyone. Jayshree, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to your experience. And I think it's really inspirational. I think it's inspirational for girls. I think it's also inspirational for anyone who supports girls and young women as they're exploring their interests and trying out new things. So I just really appreciate you coming and having a conversation with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. If you're in the audience here, you would like to share a takeaway in the chat, we would love to hear it. So if you have a takeaway that struck you during the conversation, feel free to add that in the chat. We'd love to see that. Before we head out, I'm going to talk about our next conversation with Changemakers, give you some updates here. So I'm going to pull that up real quick, but feel free to share your takeaways. So thank you for everyone who joined us today. We have a few reminders. If you know a Girl Scout grades 11 or 12 that's making a difference in her community, please head over to our Celebrate Changemakers page on our website and nominate her for a Changemaker Award. This award will be given at the 2021 Celebrate Changemakers Spring Fundraiser event in May. And that's on, this award, that event, Celebrate Changemakers, is going to be on May 13th. So mark your calendars for that. You want to nominate your Changemaker by the 31st. So you have this week to kind of work on that. So if you have a girl in Girl Scout grades 11 or 12, please nominate her. We also want you to mark your calendars for our next program. We have a March episode about conversation with Changemakers happening on March 10th with Dr. Joy Lewis, who's going to speak on radical self-care in challenging times. So that should be a great topic. And there'll be links in the chat for these. And of course, don't forget to check out Jayshree's book. It sounds like a lot of what she spoke about today is elaborated on in the book, and that would be a great reading opportunity there. So thanks everyone for coming. Let's see what takeaways we had. Let's see, asking girls why they don't like something and seeing what that reflection looks like. I love that. Some great thank yous in the chat. Tish already has the book and gives it as gifts, so that's awesome. So thanks again so much for coming out to celebrate with Changemakers, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.